These audio adventures are supported by writers, narrators, and listeners like you. Without your help, these stories can't be produced. If these stories feed your imagination, please consider helping me, Joshua David Ling, feed my family by visiting joshuadavidling.com/support and becoming a monthly contributor. If you'd like to have your audiobook or audio play featured here on Audio Adventures, get in contact with me at joshuadavidling.com. Today's episode is sponsored by the following.
Hello, I'm Sarah Levesque, Editor-in-Chief of Logo Sophia magazine. I would like to invite you to explore our Pilgrim's Journal of Life, Love, and Literature, both in visual format and in podcast format. Our goal is to help bridge the gaps between different Christian denominations and traditions. Please visit our website at logosophiamag.com to read or listen to stories, articles, poetry, and more, all for free. We look forward to journeying with you.
4 unique individuals with unique abilities. A weather controller, an illusionist, a knight, and a power copier unite to protect the jewel of the South, Atlanta, Georgia. This is Guardians of Atlanta. The Freakshow and the Eclipse by Joshua David Ling. 1. Normal little boy. Once there was a boy named Marlin, who was just like you or me. He played outside, loved to run, and even to climb trees. His life was as normal as could be, except for how he was raised. He was stolen from his family as a young child, at only a few months of age. The woman who stole him he called mother, and truthfully there was no other that he'd ever view as matriarch. For though she was old and ugly, she gave him life's spark. She was kind to him in every way, and she watched him like a hawk. And the name of the strange woman Marlin called mother was none other than Black Squawk. How odd a name, you might be saying, and you're right in seeing a glitch. For the woman Marlin called Mommy Dear was actually a witch. She raised him to know all sorts of wicked types of craft. Unspeakable evils was Marlin's school, that was his family's path. But one day, a pastor came by the house when Black Squawk wasn't around, and Marlin never heard the word of God before, and so it quickly began to be found that the preacher's words were a balm to his soul. He'd never heard such a story, so the pastor gave him a copy of the most sacred book, and Marlin began to want God's glory. He hid the book from Black Squawk, but read it every day. He'd read instead of doing chores and even instead of play. He read so much that one day, Black Squawk could not ignore the trash and clothes that had piled up on Marlin's bedroom floor. That day was Marlin's 16th, and Black Squawk was hoping that they could perform a few spells together instead of him constantly moping. She came into Marlin's room without so much as a knock, and Marlin threw his Bible under a pillow and stood trying to hide his shock. His long and lanky frame trembled. He was almost 7 feet tall, yet somehow he still looked up to Black Squawk, that little witch who was small. "Reading the spell book? That's a good boy. We'll work a new spell today. It's been so long since you've dabbled in the arts, so long since we've sat down to play." Marlin looked down, for he had just read Exodus 22:18, which says you must not let witches live, and his heart was breaking at the seams. He was trying to hold back tears as Black Squawk seeked to comfort him. "What's wrong, Marlin? Why are you sad? Why is your face so grim?" Marlin looked back to his pillow and said, "I need to leave right now." "Why is it you have to leave? I can't allow you to go for just any reason. What is the trouble you face? What have you been reading, my son?" Then she checked the place where the book was hidden, and before Marlin could stop her, Black Squawk saw the title, and the anger in her eyes was pure. 2. Mother versus son. What is this? Where did it come from? Please don't burn it. I'll become numb. I love the Lord. At least I want to. You stupid boy. Think of all I've given you. The Lord hates all of our conjurings. I can hardly say his name. There are forces in this universe that can never be the same. A warlock like you and the Lord most of all. Now please stop this foolishness. Let's end this gall. Marlin stared at Black Squawk for a moment and tucked his Bible under his arm. He went to push past his adoptive mother, but then she did him harm. Marlin didn't see it coming, but a slap from her hand stung his face smartly. And then she began to speak in a tongue that was eerie, cold, and darkly. After she finished her incantation, which Marlin had never heard, she smiled and told him lightly, "Now maybe you'll be cured. For now you cannot leave this house unless I am dead at your feet. You will stay in this house, Marlin. Your training you will complete." Marlin began to cry. "Mother, why would you do this?" "I am protecting you, my son. Something in you is amiss." She pulled the book from under his arm and threw it against a wall, and Marlin knew what he had to do, though the thought of it made him bawl. "Is that any way to act? Marlin, you are a warlock. Get your head out of the clouds. Stand before me and talk." But Marlin's grief in this was too strong, and Black Squawk became irritated. She lashed out at him in her hate, and so the fight was instigated. This battle raged for 4 whole days. Everything possible was used. From spells and incantations to biting and scratching, they bruised one another harshly, but in the end, Marlin stood alone. Though not without being burned all over and not without broken bones. Black Squawk had reduced him to a hideous shell, ashamed at all he had done, grieving the loss of his evil mother and wondering if he had won, or if the commandments to honor one's mother and not to kill applied. All of these feelings of guilt continued constantly to well up inside. He escaped the cabin and set it ablaze so that any who came wouldn't know the things that went on in that cursed house, that twisted, diabolical freak show. 3. A day in the life of a freak show. Peanut butter crackers? He'd be doing well. Today was the 75th day since Marlin had cast a spell. It had been 12 years since those horrible events that put him on the run and into madness sent. But God was blessing him. He could feel it. And while he wasn't completely happy today, he could deal with it. He handed the pack of snacks to the man behind bulletproof glass. The dirty old gas station's attendant rang them up and handed them back. Marlin put them in his pocket and headed out the door into the concrete jungle he'd traversed so many times before. Hell's Kitchen, some called it, this dark and lonely place with millions of people but without a trace of humanity or real life. This seemed to always be so. The perfect little home to hide Marlin, the freak show. The one spell that Marlin maintained were his clothes, a rippling shadow of solid anti-light. He'd fashion it into a hoodie or cloak, anything to hide from sight. So except for the fact that he weighed so little, yet stood almost 7 feet, he barely stood out in the thousands of people who crowded New York's many streets. As he arrived at his home, he took a look up at the bell tower that stood ominously there. The stained glass windows had been spray-painted, busted, and broken without repair. The old cathedral had been a house of God years before he was born, and though it was rough, he was thankful for it to help keep him safe and warm. He headed inside and sat down at the ancient laptop he'd found. And then he looked at the wires connecting it and slowly began to frown. One day he'd make enough to not steal electricity and buy the deed to this place, but there seemed no other way to make money without showing his face. He pulled up an article he'd been working on while on the crackers he munched. But after a few moments of staring at the screen, he slowly got up and hunched. He walked to the crucifix hanging on the wall and bowed himself low beneath it. Then he began quietly to pray. Lord, help me to believe it. Help me to believe your word. And please send me something. I do not know what, Lord. Please. Without you I am dying. I am helpless as I can be. Please open these burnt and broken eyes so that I might see. Bless my freelance writing work and bless me among men. This all I pray, dear Lord. In Jesus' name. Amen. Marlin jumped back in extreme surprise at hearing another sound. It came from a space a few feet from him, and when he jumped he fell to the ground. He turned on a light and stared up at a girl who cocked her head to one side. Her hair was dark, her skin was fair, and her slender form he eyed. "Who are you?" he said in surprise. "You're an angel on the rise." 4. The Forbidden Darkness. "What?" he asked with a confused look. "Who are you? Why are you here?" "I'm so lost, and so are you. We're... The girl looked behind her with a short gasp, but then looked at him and laughed. "Angels brought me here to see you. They said you can help me come back." "What are you talking about? Do you even know what you're saying?" "Words and phrases interrupted your praying. Words from the darkness and smiles from the angels. Fire from the miscreants and trials from the strangers. And now we're being attacked. You have my front, I have your back." Just then, 2 street thugs jumped into the room and grabbed the girl by her arms. They laughed in their glee as they pulled her away, looking to do her harm. Marlin jumped up and rose from the shadows, towering over the men, streaming billows of shadowy blackness emanating from him. Mar's eyes grew black as he called upon his dark and cursed powers, as they filled the hall of his stone-walled home and permeated her towers. The thugs were dumbfounded, standing there as the darkness overtook them. Then they began to feel sharp pain as the darkness began to condemn. Small cuts and bruises were all Mar could inflict before the assailants did flee. And when the darkness left, the girl fell into his arms and said to him, "You saved me." She then fell asleep, and he thought for a moment that maybe she had fainted, but it was almost as if she had been sleepwalking. But that theory seemed to be tainted. Whatever the case, he carried her to bed and studied her beautiful face. "Lord, I asked you to send me something. Perhaps this is your grace? I beg your forgiveness from my dark heart and all the things I just did. Please forgive all my wandering, Lord, and please keep me from being backslid." 5. Diagnosis Day 1. This poem is written in the voice of Marlin Xanadu. "In all my life I've never seen such a creature as her. Such beauty externally she bears, and there's something inside that's pure. However, it's obvious it's been defiled by something much more deep. Her mind is not completely there, and though the climb is steep, I plan on helping this little one, for God sent her to me. And regardless of any fears I have, a diagnosis will help me see. Day 1. After a day with the girl God sent me, I've noticed some interesting things. I've witnessed 3 distinct personalities already, and that's certainly troubling. And so I'll document them here and my experiences with them. For those who may be reading this now, I hope This will help many men. Personality 1. The first personality I encountered seemed to be the one most lucid, even though she was definitely the one who seemed the most socially muted. I asked her name, and she didn't remember, a recurring theme I've found. But for the sake of defining these people, I've decided to call her Amy for now. Amy is a soft and scared little girl who's happy I saved her life. She refers to me as her guardian angel, and she seems to put up a fight against all the forces that live in her head, though sometimes they prevail. I believe if there's a real person in this girl, Amy's the one who's real. Personality 2. Not to be mean, but number 2 made me shiver. The transition was jarring like a whitewater river. But when it was finished, the person I did meet was calm and quiet and eerily sweet. Whenever I asked a question in turn, she'd reply with some spiritual nonsense. For a moment she tried to ignore me and meditate. This girl was some spiritual mess. And so I named this one Diana, since it was the first goddess that came to mind. Diana's not one I really like to study, even though she's kind. Personality 3. The transition to this one was smoother than before. In fact, there was no transition. No mind-shaking war. 1 minute was Diana, and the next came Jezebel, who is definitely my least favorite so far, for she seemed to know me well. Well, not personally or anything, but she did understand the power that I used when lending her a hand. This personality known as Jezebel knows much witchcraft. She knows it very well, far more than I do in fact. She talked of black magic so much, I covered my eyes and hid. She called me her little boy, and spoke of prophecy amid a mountain of stone in Georgia of all places. Soon she fell asleep, hiding all of Amy's faces. 6. Diagnosis, Day 2. This poem is written in the voice of Marlon Xanadu. What a night it was indeed. Amy slept very well. I, however, tossed and turned, wondering what kind of spell, or who would ever inflict this damage on themselves or another. It was a puzzle I had to solve, though the thought of it made me shudder. Day 2. Day 2 overall seemed a lot better. Though Amy was nowhere to be seen, I'm still convinced she's the actual person in this cavalcade of personalities obscene. Personality 4. This personality seemed somewhat confused, and somewhat clumsy as well. She spoke in a southern accent, and so I called her Belle. The most interesting thing that Belle did was not something that she said, but she started building something using whatever laid around her instead. She seemed very mechanically inclined, and so I let her do whatever it is she had in mind, but that plan went askew. Jezebel transitioned smoothly and swung the half-made object at me. I held her down and tied her up, and she cursed at me with glee. I get to more of this later on in the Jezebel principle, but for now I have to treat this as something that isn't exactly fixable. 5. The next personality shift was far more violent than normal. She twisted and convulsed in her bonds. It seemed almost paranormal. But when she came out of her shifting state, she inquired if I had been hurt. I told her no, realizing this was someone else, and gladly I could rest for a spurt. This personality seemed very calm and loving, maybe undyingly faithful. She spoke of a son she'd lost long ago. It sounded incredibly painful. This one I named Mary, for she spoke only of her son, and that reminded me of the mother of Jesus, and I admit I got lost in this one. Personality 6. Just as I was about to release her bonds, her voice changed abruptly in tone, this time to more of a teenager's voice, someone who seemed far from home. She actually kissed me as I leaned down, and I backed away in a fright. She laughed and playfully mocked my reaction, and her smile was seductive and slight. I ignored this one as much as possible due to my embarrassment, though what she said was still interesting, and it was apparent this personality was most carnal of all, playful in every possible thing. I put her down as Brittany, 'cause she reminded me of pop stars who sing. The Jezebel Principle. All these things being said about personalities great and small, the one thing I have seemed to overlook might be most important of all. Jezebel is deceitful, deceitful as can be. She'll even act like the others to try and fool me. Some of these personalities might just be a con. In fact, all of them could be. But I think that's wrong. They all seem like echoes to me, except for sweet Amy. I plan to help her somehow. I will help this lady. Final diagnosis. Some want to leave, some want to stay, some want to help, and some want to play. But the constant thing between all of these is that mountain of stone. Whatever is troubling her, the answer is there, and she will not go alone. I will use all the money I've saved, and by hook or by crook get us down to Stone Mountain, Georgia, to find out what makes this lovely one frown. 7. Study, study, study. This poem is written in the voice of Amy and her personalities.
Day 1. This is the tale of a man who actually thinks he can help me. What a fool he is to think he can help this one be free. Mountain of stone, that is my home, but he refuses to take me instead. He writes things down in his brightly lit book and attempts to know what's in my head. Study, 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 my ugly, beautiful angel. Study, 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 and see what's so painful. I am lost, but I beg to be found. I almost see hope with you around.
Hope, you stupid girl! There is no hope. There is no way for you to cope but to make the sacrifice at the Mount of Stone.
No, it isn't right. I want my own home. I'm longing for sister, for fiancé, for my love. I set my eyes on the skies above. Study, 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 my ugly, beautiful angel. Study, 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 and see what's so painful. I am lost, but I beg to be found. I almost see hope with you around. Words and phrases all around, sentences and fragments trickling down. None of them speak what is churning inside, wriggling and writhing with no way to subside. Lost lives and homes, broken pieces of me sewn together into a mess of me. I wonder what my fate is going to be. Mountain is the stone. Philip K. made me insane. Atlanta ants.
8. Darkness Unleashed. As Amy was writing, the door was kicked in, and a man entered without a word. He pointed some handheld device at her, and he did not deter. To use it to shoot out a sticky glob that stuck Amy to the wall neutralized. Then he pulled out a handgun and shot at the man she prized. Marlin jumped behind a pew and was only hit once, and he fought within himself to hold back. But after a deafening grunt, he uttered the words he hated to speak and became intangible to men. His form was that of a billowing shadow, and he rose above the men. The man stepped back and shot some more, but it did him no good.
You've bit off far more than you can chew. Is that much understood?
Marlin descended on top of the man, using black smoke to pin the man down. He coughed and sputtered and tried to scream and thrash, trying not to drown.
Why are you here? What do you want? I need answers now.
The man choked out, "Get off me! Ow!" Marlin, however, persisted.
Why are you here at all? Who is the one who troubles this girl? Tell me, you sick rag doll.
The man coughed again and said,
Red Death, that is the answer you seek.
What does he want?
Marlin shot back.
I don't know, you stupid freak.
Marlin pressed harder and screamed at the man.
Tell me all that you know.
He's raising some kind of ancient evil out of a mountain of stone. He needs her for some reason. I simply didn't ask. Please let me go.
And with that, Marlin turned his back. The man's gun was gone, nowhere to be seen, and the man himself cowered beneath Mars' stare. He shook in fetal position on the floor, gasping in lungfuls of air. Amy stood terrified, stuck in the goop, not believing what she'd seen. And Marlin had never seen someone who looked so pale and green. The pangs of guilt for what he'd done flooded back to him, but he felt worst for scaring Amy when her condition was so grim. 9. Trust. As Marlin's eyes lingered on Amy, she screamed and tried to run, but of course she couldn't, because to the wall she clung. Marlin tiptoed over cautiously, trying to put her at ease. I'm sorry that I scared you, Amy, but please listen. Please. I know that looked very dark. I know that it was scary, but you have to trust me. I'm not evil. You don't have to be wary. Amy shook and looked at him, though not in his eyes. You lied to me, she said in a whisper, and then began to cry. Marlin sighed, his broken heart breaking again for her. He turned her face toward his own and said, 2 things are for sure. I'm sorry if I lied to you. I never meant to deceive. And I will do anything to help you. That much you can believe. Amy looked into his eyes and slowly nodded her head. We're going to take you to Stone Mountain. We'll get answers there instead of being attacked and guessing things about why you are who you are. But we better start moving for hitchhikers. This trip is very far. Amy fidgeted at the words Stone Mountain, as if she didn't want to go, even though many other times the words made her heart glow. She said nothing about it, however, and instead only looked down. Marlin began to loosen her from the goop. Come on, let's get out of this town. 10. Off to seek answers. This poem is written in the voice of Amy. Though my angel lied, he said that he was sorry. All this time I'd felt alone. I didn't have to worry. My angel will protect me, even at the mount. So off we are to seek the answers of what I am all about. Hitchhiking is an interesting affair. To get anywhere, you seek a ride from anyone who cares. And while it might be dangerous to everyone involved, my angel will protect them from me and my assaults. All these roads, the twisting and bending, all these cities and streets, they embrace me with their hot asphalt and give me a sense of peace. That smoggy air of Philly fair was really quite a treat, and the greasy bag that held my sandwich was a morsel quite sweet. Rolling hills and horses, I almost have forgotten where it is I'm going, because of the land I've trod on. Echoes ceasing, still believing. There is only Amy and my guardian angel who watches out for me. Through the mountains now we go, over the rocky crags. We are getting close now. There is no turning back. I know the answers all lay at that dreaded mountain of stone. And though these crags are mountains too, they're nothing like that zone. And at last we've come to the forest city of pines and peach trees alike. I'm beginning to think this was a bad idea. I mean, who really needs the light? Darkness is sweet, and ignorance is bliss.
Who really wants to know the reasons why they all hurt me and made of me a show? But I hear her evil calling me, and I cannot turn away. Save me, please, oh Marlin, my angel, please show me the way.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Audio Adventures. If your imagination was fed by this story, I pray that you'll consider supporting these stories at joshuadavidling.com/support. Until next time, keep adventuring.